Maurice Nicol, Psychological Commentary, Volume 2, based on Gurdjieff's teachings. Birdlip, November 18th, 1944. Commentary on the Mind, Part 1. A question was asked recently about minding as to what is the difference between not minding and being indifferent. I will repeat the question. If you do not mind, things do not hurt you. After a time, perhaps, we learn this great lesson rightly, but most people think that not to mind means to be indifferent. A long time ago, it was said by Ouspensky that at a meeting that being indifferent is one of the worst states of sleep that one can be in. What difference can you discern between not minding and being indifferent? We are told that one of the worst things is to be indifferent. And the point of the question was to draw a distinction between not minding and being indifferent. Now, we mind according to our minds. The object of this work is to change our minds. What are our minds? We imagine perhaps that our minds are infinitely flexible. However, such minds as we have are built up things, acquired things. We are, for example, by education, told that we must think this or that, imitate that, and so on. And all this forms our minds, the minds we go about with. Most of us have very rigid minds in this sense. These acquired minds of ours are parts of our personality, that is, the acquired side of our psychology. Now, you must all understand that this work begins with changing the mind, and this means changing the way that we think about everything. You may have been taught that you must not worry about this or that, and this forms part of your mind, of your acquired mind. And therefore, when this or that happens, you will mind it because that is your form of mind. You will feel that you must mind because your mind has been formed by what you have been taught as regards to this or that. So when any impression falls on you from outside life that hits your mind in this way, you will mind it. You will think of it according to this mind that has been laid down in you. And so you will not see any other way of taking the incident that has happened to you that is another way of minding it. In fact, it will never occur to you that you need not mind the thing in the way that you mind it. Let us say, for example, that you have been taught that such and such people are very bad. Then you will always mind those people because your acquired mind is laid down in it this way of minding, this way of taking people and thinking about people. Now, one of the first great objects of the work is to make us think in a new way about everything, including ourselves. Mr. Ouspensky used to say continually to us at one time that the object of the work is to make us think in a new way. That means to have different minds. Now, to think in a new way is to have a new mind. And this means that we think in a way that we will not mind all the same things as we formerly did. Change of mind is the basis of all esoteric teaching belonging to the period since Christ. Speaking more deeply, the reason that man is now so closed up, so almost dead, so asleep, that the only thing left for esotericism to touch in him is the root via the mind. For this reason, Christ taught the Greek word wrongly interpreted as repentance, or correctly as change of mind, as the starting point of his esoteric teaching. And we can say in general that no one nowadays has any chance of awakening and of inner transformation or feeling new influences except through the pathway of the mind. The mind must change. That is, the minding of things must change. Therefore, it is a very good thing to observe how you mind things because all your minding things depend on what form your mind has been made to take. By example, by what you have been taught, by acquired prejudice, an imitated attitude, and so on. However, we take All that has been laid down in our minds is quite real, quite true, and in fact, as the only mind possible. But as long as we do this, our minds do not and cannot change. Everyone has certain mental standpoints, certain mental prejudices, certain ingrained ideas as to what is right and wrong. And as long as all these remain unchallenged by the person himself, though attentive self observation, as long as they are not observed, that person will continue to mind always in the same way and will not realize that the ideas of the work seek to change this fixed mind and make the man think in quite a new way. For if the mind is fixed, no one can think in a new way. We think from our form of mind. Now, supposing that your mind is very fixed and limited, and then you will always mind in a fixed and limited way. For example, you will feel it is right to be upset about this and that, and angry about that, or depressed about something else, and so on. You will mind all these things. Why do you mind them? You mind them because this is how your mind works. You mind them because you have been taught all these things, all this type of minding. It's an infinite thing. And this thing that we call our minds, which we have acquired, is not total mind at all. It's like a little heap of stones on a vast open plain. It is something very small and arbitrary in the sense that one has acquired it without thinking for oneself. One of these stones may be your own, but the rest are acquired. One has been taught to make this little heap of stone, to take it as if it were the whole of one's mind with all its infinite possibilities of understanding and insight. When something strikes the mind that we cannot entertain, we say, "Tut, tut," or we get angry because we can only take in through a little chink certain things that correspond with these little heaps of stones that we call our minds. So we go about as if it were, or as it were, with a very small instrument that has been created or less haphazard in us and receive all life on this little, quite inadequate instrument, this heap of stones. Now, how do you mind? Have you noticed how you mind things? Are you satisfied with the way you mind things, or might you mind things differently? If you've noticed this, then you're beginning to reach the point of changing your minding. And this means changing your actual minds and having new minds. To change the mind, new thoughts are necessary. How difficult is it to change our minds? One reason is that we never observe our minds or how we mind things as we do. We take our minds and so our minding of everything so for granted. We believe our troubles have nothing to do with our minds in the way that they're formed. We can notice that we do not connect with what kind of minds we have. In fact, we don't know that we have minds of a particular form. We do not attack our minds. We don't suspect our minds. All our mental habits to us are not habits, but truths. They're quite right to us. There can be no other point of view. We cannot see them as habits. This is a tragedy. So we cannot see things that so many things we keep on minding so much are due to invisible mental habits. Of course, we do have to worry. Of course, we have to think that this is impossible. Of course, we have to say that we never have heard of such a thing. Of course, we have to say, well, I never, and so on. And why? Because we take our mental habits as ultimate truths, as ultimate standards, not even realizing they are mental habits that we have acquired insensibly over a long period, over, in fact, a long dark period that inevitably intervenes, the dark ages, before we start to think for ourselves, about life, about why we do and say the things that we do and say, and about who we are. It is certainly very difficult to realize one's mechanicalness in the three centers. We may notice our mechanicalness in the moving center, but it takes a long time for most of us to realize our mechanicalness in the emotional and intellectual centers. That is, the habits of emotion and thinking. Now, the work starts with the mind or the intellectual center, and for that reason, its approach is called psychological. It does not start from the fakir point of view with torturing the body or with the monk point of view with breaking down the emotions. It starts with the mind, as do the Gospels. It starts with changing the mind, with seeing things differently, with new teaching, new ideas. Unless this begins to take place, unless we begin to see mentally ourselves and in life in a new way, we cannot expect to work on the other centers except in a purely unintelligent way. I may sit all day on my haunches. I may refuse food. I may subject myself to the greatest physical torments as a fakir, but the result will be quite useless because it is not linked up with my understanding and so will lead to no inner development. But if I start with my mind and observe, let's say, how I mind things, in what way I mind things, and ask myself why I mind things in this way, and think of the work, I will begin to have some insight into the thing I have always taken for granted as being indisputably myself and always right, which I call my mind. I will begin to see that my mind, such as it is, with this little heap of stones in it, is a funny, limited thing and something that I cannot possibly say is always right. In fact, I will begin to see that my mind is possibly wrong, and all my ideas may be wrong in that, in a sense. I have to get rid of this form of my mind, of this small way of thinking about everything. And so, of this way of minding, can you imagine someone coming to you at a moment when you're minding something very much and saying, do you not see that the reason why you mind this so much is because there is something wrong with your mind and that you are wrongly minding and you should try to change your mind and think in quite a new way about this thing you are stupidly minding so much? No doubt this would be very cross. Now, try to look more deeply into this question of why you mind things and catch a glimpse that it is because there is something in your minds that makes you mind in this way, something in your thoughts, which only come from your minds, such as they are. For as long as your minds are formed in this way, they will always produce the same kinds of thoughts. I mean, try to see that you must mind things because of the heap of stones that you take as only mind you can have. I remember Gurdjieff once making us all shout at the top of our voices, I can work. Now, when you're reminding something very much, shout to yourself, I can work. And I can see what the work means at such a moment. That is, summon up all the work mind. All this means that we should observe more deeply in what prejudices and ideas we have been taught in the past that make us mind as we do. Supposing you merely say to yourself, I need not mind in this way and repeat it. Will that be work? Will that be self-observation? Will that be trying to get down into what one's mind is like? Will that be seeing mental mechanicalness? Why, of course not. We have to struggle with ourselves more than that to see what our stone heaps are like, formed in all these acquired things, buffers, prejudices, all these little local environments, things that have formed in our small minds, just to say, I must not mind, and go about with some awful and sacred expression saying, I must not mind over and over again is not the work and has nothing to do with the work. But if now you say, why do I mind? Then perhaps, though, sincere observation or through sincere observation, you may notice something in you that has reigned undisturbed in you, some acquired idea of life or others or of yourself that is the cause of your minding so much. You know how often a person begins to bristle and say in so many words, do you mean to say, I don't know what is right and wrong? Or a remark of that kind. Well, you must all have noticed that reaction in yourselves and how quickly you come up against your level of being. This work is to teach us anew right and wrong, because of the object of the work is to lift us to a more conscious level where people do not bristle in that way, where people do not mind as we ordinarily mind. The work is to lift us to a level where people's minds are different from our minds, to a level where people mind things differently, where people mind being negative through the light of their new minds. I remember in one occasion, Mr. Ospinski was talking about attitude and how marvelous it was if you could find the right attitude to things. I had to take a group for him soon afterwards and made the mistake of allowing people to talk of attitudes as emotional things and received a good dressing down, and quite rightly. Attitude begins as a mental thing. He said in so many words, you must understand that attitude starts in the intellectual center. It belongs to the mind. Change of attitude is a change of the intellectual center to begin with. Our mental attitudes affect our emotional center, but the origin lies in the intellectual center in our minds. People have all sorts of mental attitudes without knowing they have them. Negative attitudes are like dead places in the mind. Nothing grows. Instead of thinking, people have an attitude which has been acquired from their upbringing and imitated from parents. It is only by thinking in quite new ways that these ingrained attitudes are altered and the mind is freed to think for itself. It should be quite clear to most of us that our minding comes from our mental ideas and attitudes which we take for granted and are therefore unaware that we have them. Negative mental attitudes can be called prejudices, and if they increase, they become buffers. On another occasion, Mr. Ospinski said to us, what we call education, usually as regards to the minding, nothing is more than the acquisition of a number of stereotyped negative attitudes. The mind then becomes almost dead. You must understand, he went on, that the last thing people will do is to think. No one wants to think. Thinking is too difficult for most people. They prefer to go along with the minds they have acquired. And if a person has no magnetic center, the outlook is not good.